What can I say about Jesse Galef? Well, fortunately there's a paper here that tells me all I can say about it. He's our communications director for the SSA. Before being hired in 2010, he worked as the Secular Coalition for America and the American Humanist Association. He graduated with honors from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with a degree in political science. He was president of the non-religious student group on campus, as well as an active member of various religious organizations, including the Orthodox Christian Fellowship and Christian Apologetics of Carolina. In his spare time, he likes to read, break dance, and play board games. He's talking to us today about the defense against the dark arts. 3, 2, 1. The defense against the dark arts. Jesse Galef.
Thank you. I have given this talk once before. I had 50 minutes for it that time. This is going to be reduced. I'm going to talk fast. My advice in this is not to talk fast. In fact, that is less persuasive when you have a good argument. I'll get to that. But if you could excuse me for that, because I'm trying to put a huge amount in space. So yes, this is defense against the dark arts, a phrase that I've seen in rationality, persuasion. It can be used for evil, it can be used for good. It's really powerful, and it's one of my favorite topics that I've been studying, both professionally and personally, just reading as much as I can about it. When I went to Chicago, one of the favorite things about that event was the flyers they made. Me with each of the defense against the dark arts instructors. I like this one the most. Partly because Mad Eye Moody is really badass, and also because I can actually move one eye independently. I really hope my ex-girlfriend Lisa is okay with me using that picture. But to try to restore some sense of being a credible human being, I have 5 years experience as an orar doing communications. With 3 organizations, Dave mentioned them. I give a media training. It's actually going to be a messaging training workshop at, I believe, 2:30, an hour on how to message what you're trying to get across. And I've faced deadly foes and survived. This does not include the Reason Rally, which was a huge beast in and of itself. This talk, what's it going to be about? How does persuasion work? How can we defend against manipulation? And what are the ethical concerns in wielding this power? And yes, I said there was an Imperio joke. This is the only one, sadly, but you had me at Imperio. It was too good to pass up. So I want to get some sense from the audience, a show of hands. How many of you would lie to influence somebody? Okay, there's some hands. How many of you would use a true but misleading or out of context story to influence people? Yeah. Okay, no, that's a bunch more. Yeah. How many would put somebody in an emotionally persuadable state? Yeah. Okay. And last one, how many of you would exploit the weaknesses in human reasoning? Hands shot up. Okay. And just for the people who didn't raise their hand, how many of you would use these but didn't want to raise your hands to admit it? What is wrong with you? No points to Gryffindor. So the bad news is that this is a really messy subject. It's not clean-cut, it's not pure logic. There's a lot of fuzzy areas and gray areas, and really balancing idealism with realism. And Dobby is sad about this, but it's the way it is, and we need to figure out how to handle this part of the truth. So one thing that I repeatedly hear when it comes to persuasion and communications and public relations is that if you're telling the truth, it's fine. That's the only gold standard. If you're saying true things, well, that leaves loopholes big enough to drive a Greyhound bus through. This is not a very good metric. The whole truth is impossible. You know, tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That's absurd. We cannot convey the entire corpus of knowledge of the human race in every single utterance we give. We pick and choose which facts to share, what context to give them in, a lot of nonverbal cues, and so a lot of persuasion is choosing the selective truths we are sharing. And how do we do that without being two-faced? I put that in just for this joke. Screw you, I'm having fun. Anecdotes are one of these really popular and common tools to use. They are selective truths, they are usually non-representative of the overall data set, and they're very powerful. And I wanted to share one of the scientific experiments on this. Subjects were asked to take a study on, I think it was a survey on technology use. If a psychology professor ever asks you to get involved in a study, you know they're lying to you. It had nothing to do with technology use. The subjects were given $5 afterwards for participating, and then given the opportunity to donate some of it to alleviate suffering in Africa. I think it was starvation. And when they were given the data about the suffering in Africa and the drought and starvations, people gave an average of $1.14 out of these $5. Okay, more than 20%, that's kind of impressive. What do you think happened when there was a story about little Rokia and no data, just one person? Any guesses? More than double. $2.38 when people just saw the story about Rokia. So one thing that's possible is that both of these are persuasive, they're both helpful in motivating people to act, and so maybe both of them together would be even more persuasive because people would see the large-scale impact and give it a human face, and that would be a glorious image of human rationality, and it's wrong. Showing people the data along with the anecdote made them donate less. And this has been confirmed in other studies where priming people before giving the opportunity to donate, either by asking them to do simple math problems to get them into a thinking, analytic mindset, or asking them to think of words when they hear the word baby, how they feel about that. The affective decision-making kicks in when they think about the baby, and they donate more. This is depressing as hell. So my guideline for how to choose selective truths is, are we helping people make predictions about the world? Are we enabling them to understand and grasp the underlying principles of what's going on? And there's a really neat study mentioned in Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman. We'll get to him more in a minute. The background study is that they took people and tested to see whether they would get up to help somebody who they thought was having a seizure. And most people think that everyone would get up, we are good human beings, those people would be wrong. 4 out of the 15 got up to help immediately when they thought somebody was having a seizure. That's a little sad, but now the question comes, if other people are shown videos of this happening, people given the opportunity to get up and help somebody who they think is having a seizure, do they get up and help? And so they asked people, they showed 2 videos of participants from this original study and cut it off before they had the opportunity to get up, so you didn't know. And they asked people, do you think these 2 people got up to help? And they divided them, as a good scientific study does, into people who were told the base rate and people who were not told the base rate of 27%. Did it help? No. Being told the base rate did not substantially affect people's predictions of whether these 2 good, upstanding human beings would help the person with the seizure. But when they went the other way and showed the 2 videos without the base rate and said, these 2 people did not get up to help, what do you think the base rate is? People were remarkably good at figuring out the about 27%. This is wrong. The study's authors, I think, had the quote, subjects' unwillingness to deduce the particular from the general was matched only by their willingness to infer the general from the particular. And what does that say about how people learn and how people think? If we are trying to give people the ability to make predictions in the world, giving them the data does not give them that ability. If we are actually trying to educate people, representative anecdotes is far more useful and far more powerful. Of course, the problem is, what is representative? What impact are we trying for? How out of context is inappropriate? And this has come up, how many of you know the name Patricia Smith with the Boston Globe? She won a Pulitzer Prize, but I hadn't heard of her until reading about this. She was caught making up quotes and characters. And when confronted with it, she admitted, but said that she, quote, created characters to create the desired impact and slam home a salient point. And so she got the idea, she got the message that if you want people to learn and understand the world, you need to help them with a digestible anecdote, but she decided not to be bounded by reality. I'm less troubled by that after hearing that you can teach people possibly better with fake stories, but society seems to have a problem with lying, and anybody taking power more than saying, well, here's the range of anecdotes, let's take the strongest one. If you're not even bounded by that, society, I think, is afraid of people taking too much power, and I think that's a legitimate fear. More about which truths to share. Do you want to share the other side? They've had a huge meta-analysis of a lot of studies, and it turns out, yes, you want to show both sides as long as you refute the other side quickly. What ends up happening, this was studied by the United States government to try to prevent brainwashing of prisoners of war in Korea and beyond. If you give people a bad argument, a weak argument, for the other side, and then let them refute it or refute it yourself, they are now resistant, not just to that particular strain, but any other arguments towards that goal. So hypothetically, if you guys are trying to convince somebody that God doesn't exist, and you give an argument that is not persuasive, and the theist thinks that they can refute it quickly, they are now more resistant to arguments of atheism later. What I draw from this is that we need to be really careful about engaging until we think we have a good argument. If we're just, scattershot, then we are making it more difficult in the future. How persuasion works? How it should work, at least, and I think I've already indicated it's not how I want it to be. Habermas, who's famous for discourse ethics and a lot of the various ethical concerns, says that ideally claims are motivated solely by the rational forces of better reasons. And sad copy. Yes. And that's more of the meat of this talk. The messy truth about our minds is that they're not purely logical. Dan Kahneman, who I mentioned, won the Nobel Prize for behavioral economics, divided the mind into two systems. These are heuristics, but system one, intuitive, fast, sort of the gut feeling, and system two, the deliberative thinking, conscious mind. And we're often wrong about what affects us. There's a lot of motivated reasoning that happens that our conscious mind finds answers and justifications for what system one is telling us is true. And the way I love to describe this is a quote from Stephen Koss: "You are not the king of your brain, you are the creepy guy standing next to the king going, a most judicious choice." This is what's happening. We have a lot of emotional feelings about what's true, what we want to be true, how we want to be perceived, and this helps us find reasons to justify these underlying emotions, and it happens all the time. I have not enough time to run through tons of studies about where our brains get it wrong, but I'll go through some of the fun ones. Appearance. Hugely important. The halo effect is confirmed in tons of studies that if somebody is attractive, we assume they have all the other good qualities. If they're attractive, they must be competent. If they're attractive, they must be honest. If they're attractive, they must be very intelligent and knowledgeable. This is not supposed to be the case. Politicians who were rated as handsome got 2.5 times as many votes as politicians who were not rated handsome. 73% of people said that looks might have affected their vote. 14% said it might have, so at least 14% have a sense, or they're just really jaded. Height and size. Height and size are both associated with power and authority. Cialdini, one of the pioneers of compliance research, theorizes this is why a lot of con men wear lifts in their shoes, to try to seem taller. People associate a higher title. Looking back, they rated people as taller in retrospect. Clothing. Wearing the right clothing to imply authority is hugely successful. Milgram experiments is a classic example of putting people in a context where there's a scientist with a white coat telling them to proceed and shock their fellow participant. There are other studies like that. Similarity. Somebody who's similar to you, dressed similarly, or even has the same name, is more persuasive to you. People sending out surveys and asking them to be returned, they did a study either having the researcher's actual name or a fake name that was close to the recipient. And the people who got a letter from somebody whose name resembled theirs, far more likely to fill out the survey as requested. Delivery. How you deliver your message matters a lot in how it's taken. Repetition is interpreted as truth. When you ask somebody how accurate something is, a big part of that is how often they've seen it. Even when they were told when they saw it, it was false. When they later went back, they showed people a series of statements over and over again over time, and at the time told them it was true or false. Later, asking them without the true or false label, how accurate they thought it was. The ones they'd seen more was correlated with how accurate they thought it was. 2, rhyming feels like truth. They tested aphorisms and twisted them either to make them rhyme or not make them rhyme. Aphorisms like, patience and measure will win you treasure, was rated as more true than patience and measure will win you riches. I got nothing for that. Cursing. Cursing shows passion. I loved reading about this study. They took a general speech, I think it was about raising tuition costs or not, and inserted mild swearing at the beginning or end or not at all. Mild swearing was more persuasive. I think it shows passion, it shows that you care. This is not entirely illegitimate, but really adding the word damn near the beginning should not help persuade people very much. Last, framing. Just changing the word think and feel, depending on the audience being more affectively minded, feeling, or cognitively minded, whether they tend to think. Phrasing things as, I think it's true that blank, or I feel it's true that blank, was more persuasive by what their cognitive style was. And lastly, repetition is a different issue. But there's actually a different study I was going to talk about in which repetition, not just the same people saying it, but when people were trying to assess the opinion of the overall group, one person repeating themselves 3 times had 9% of the impact as 3 different people asserting the same value. So, how many of you are online and look at comment threads? How many of you see people saying the same thing over and over? This is actually a legitimate strategy. I don't know whether I'm telling you to do it because it's annoying as hell, but repetition is interpreted as truth.
That's the ethics part.
There's the ethics part. Social heuristics. A lot of what we decide is accurate, and what we're willing to do depends on what we think other people are doing and thinking. The common example is in hotels. They have a sign that they're putting up now. Many people, or most people, reuse their towels to save water. When they put up these signs, more people reuse their towels. It actually works the other way too, though. A petrified wood forest made the mistake of putting up a sign saying, many people take pieces of petrified wood from the forest. Please don't preserve our natural resource. Theft went up. Reciprocity, there are a lot of studies that if you do somebody a favor, they're more likely to comply with the favor for you later, but it also works the other way. It's called the Franklin effect. Asking somebody for a favor, especially if you are giving somebody a chance to show off their expertise, they're more likely to like you and give you favors and believe you in the future. Public commitments. Cognitive dissonance is a lot of what's going on here. People asserting in public that they have certain views makes them more likely to follow through and take it even further later. There are a couple examples about voting. One is, if you ask somebody whether they're going to vote, there's some pressure to say yes, and they say yes. They are more likely to vote. But also, if you ask them to give a reason, say, oh, why are you likely to vote? I think about 20% increase in how many people actually went out to vote if they were told the researcher their reason for coming out. But it doesn't have to come from them. A sense of identity is really important, and you can implant one. So there was another time they asked somebody to go through their voting record and habits, and then at the end, randomly told them that they were likely to vote or not. People who were told they were good voters and good citizens were 17% more likely to go to the polls. I love the idea of going up to somebody and saying, you're clearly a reasonable and calm person. Because suddenly they feel a pressure. Oh, this is how I perceive, this is my identity, I can live up to this. This is pretty powerful. These are all ways that should not work as much as they do. And I'm explaining them. Has anybody heard of Dan Ariely? Oh, okay, everybody should check him out. He has fantastic TED Talks, a lot of behavioral economics, and he starts one of his TED Talks by saying, I'm going to talk about human irrationality. Not yours, of course, other people's. And what I want to get at is, this is us too. We are susceptible to these as well. And so how do we defend against these dark arts? Constant vigilance. I'm glad I got to throw this in, but it's actually accurate. Dan Kahneman, as I said, pioneer in this field, said the way to block errors that originate in System 1 is simple in principle. Recognize the signs that you're in a cognitive minefield, slow down, and ask for reinforcements from System 2. Of course, he went on to add, we are least likely to apply this sensible procedure when it is most needed. He's somewhat pessimistic about our ability to improve our reasoning and thinking process. He said because he studied it for so long and hasn't noticed an improvement in himself, that it's unlikely. I do have a lot of hope. Partly an organization that was just founded by my sister and some of my friends in Berkeley, the Center for Applied Rationality, is studying and then practicing how to improve people's reasonings, giving them workshops and try to walk through ways to actually train people to think better, not just say, here's a cognitive bias, good luck. Figuring out how to train it. And there are some other reasons for hope in one of the most commonly cited compliance studies that gets cut off, usually, in how I see it presented. How many of you know the copier study that Cialdini talks about? You're someone lucky to know. So, somebody tries to cut in line at the copier machine and says, I have 5 copies, can I cut in front of you? And with no reason given, 60% of people said yes. All right, that's pretty nice of them. When they said, because I'm in a hurry, 94% of people let them cut in line. How about when they said, I have 5 copies, can I cut in front of you because I need to make some copies? No shit. This normally is taken as evidence that saying the word because is a magic trigger that people just click, oh, they have a reason. I will let them in front of me. So this part seems depressing, and it is. But that's usually where people stop talking about the study. They've done more. Ask them for 20 copies. So a lot more copies. With no reason given, only 24% of people let them cut in front. With a good reason, because I'm in a hurry, 48, double the number of people let them cut in front. What do you think happens when you give them no good reason and just say, can I make 20 copies because I need to make copies? It's back down to 24. When there's a big favor and people are starting to pay attention, wait, what is this? Of course you need to make copies. People start paying attention and system 2 kicks back in. And we start to have good thinking, good reasoning for compliance or believing people. And so I want to walk through some of the ways that we can help good arguments win, bad arguments fail, and do persuasion in a way that actually helps society and not just helps the individual. Zoning out puts system 1 in charge. They've done studies, people who are tired or fatigued, people who are unable to really engage with the material. System 1 is far more powerful. I think Cialdini's hypothesizes this is why infomercials happen so late at night. And so managing the attention is key. You can do this in a few different ways. If your issue is complex, slow down. At the beginning I said that I'm talking faster than I should. That's because I'm trying to get a lot of material in, and I'm very bad at cutting part of my baby. But people with good arguments, talking more slowly was persuasive. People with bad arguments, talking very quickly was more persuasive. This is why a lot of marketers will talk very quickly if they don't have a good argument. But it's really about how much people can pay attention and engage with the material. And another way to help them engage with it and pay attention is by dosing them with psychoactive chemicals. Not actually a joke, caffeine has been found to increase people's attention, and people who were given a drink with real caffeine or were told that there might have been caffeine, they were more likely to be persuaded by good arguments and less likely to be persuaded by bad arguments. This is the kind of thing we're looking for. That is not just pure power for whatever somebody happens to want. This is something that will only help the truth win out. I mentioned a lot of motivated reasoning, and there are emotional barriers to people accepting the truth. One thing you can do is encouraging a delay in presenting them with the evidence and asking them to decide. There are studies that asking people to wait and think before responding decreases the amount of their quick reactive system, and they can think more. Reducing pressure to act. This one is fantastic. One of the most common and most powerful compliance techniques is telling people, but you're free to say no. I did not expect that. I've been taught that putting the pressure on people and making them really sweat it out and decide, apparently over study after study, telling people that they have the option to say no, that they're in control, really does make them more comfortable accepting what you're asking them to do. Reducing entry costs. Again, studies asking people, I think it was for the American Cancer Society, to please donate. Everything helps, every dollar helps, every penny counts. The pennies did most. And it's not just that more people donated and donations were smaller. The average donation was the same or higher. They got a lot more money by making it seem like less of a big deal to enter into this engagement. Lastly, affirming their value. I love this one. Chris Mooney talks about a study by Brendan Nyhan in which he presented partisans with evidence against their deeply held beliefs. I think it was things like whether global warming is happening, whether the stimulus decreased unemployment, whether the surge in Iraq decreased casualties, and presented them with evidence. They were not very persuaded. This is a very deeply held belief. But if you walk them through a self-affirmation exercise first, asking them what qualities they find really important, and to think about a time that they did well on this quality, they were far more able to accept the evidence against their deeply held belief. This is fantastic, because I can feel like a good person in affirming somebody's value and making them feel like they really have worth outside of their current beliefs, and then give them the opportunity to change their mind towards what I really believe is the truth. Stepping back, we've gone through a lot of ways that shouldn't work but do, and some ways that should work and do. And there is some question of the ethics, and I think my view of ethics, a lot of it is what do I want people to encourage each other to do? What should society encourage? And I think society does have a legitimate interest in encouraging good discourse. This is discouraging deception and exploitation of people, but also encouraging more rational appeals. And so there should be some pressure on us as well, and we should put it on others to use the good types of persuasion and not just exploit human weaknesses. It tolerates what we can't stop. Putting on a nice suit and going to an interview. I think that's far more effective than it should be, compared to how much you're going to be wearing a suit in the job. Yeah, it shows that you care, but not nearly as much as it affects people. But we don't tell people that they're unethical for wearing a suit because everyone else is doing it. It's too late, that cat's out of the bag. And we're wary of concentrated power. I think that's legitimate. Everybody might have heard the absolute power corrupts absolutely. Anytime somebody gets really good at persuasion, we get a little uneasy. And I think that there's a reason for that. My guidelines, as I've been thinking about this, I gave a talk similar to this, but it was the psychology of persuasion, not the psychology and ethics of persuasion, and it made my boss uncomfortable about 3 years ago. So just to wrap all this up, my guidelines are to think about whether you're exerting an amount of influence that's inappropriate or proportionate to how much confidence you have. Because if we could start that standard, I think we would get at the truth much more quickly. Are we attempting to do good and reduce harm? That's an obvious consequentialist take on whether you're doing a good thing. Are you using common techniques, or are you introducing something new to this race to the bottom in a persuasion arms race? And lastly, are you combating undue influences from cultural opponents? We are cultural opponents with Campus Crusade for Christ and a lot of the religious right, and they are using pathos, they are using anecdotes, they're using emotional appeals. I do think that factors into our ethical decisions of what we can or need to use to try to get people back to the truth. Takeaways, if nothing else, emotion does factor into human decision making. There's way too much research for that. We can make good arguments win. It's not hopeless, it's not pure sleight of hand. Many persuasion techniques are more powerful than they ideally would be. And lastly, influence is power. Please use it for good. I trust you all in this room, but it is something that can influence the world. And so please use your power for good. This is what I got for you today.